This is in any languages. For example, the word bus in the English language, what's its origin? I think it's French, if not mistaken. Autobus, right? And became bus. In Arabic, what do they call it? Bus, right? Bus, boss. Right, so and then the Arabic morphology associated with it, and so you see that in many other languages, right? In other languages, you see that if there's a word that is not known in it, a description, it gets integrated into it. For example, when the Prophet ﷺ says "sana," "sana," which means beautiful or good, right? It becomes integrated. It does not negate that it became an Arabic word, and so we're saying this so that people would not point and say, "Hey, listen. Look, there is non-Arabic words in the Quran. The Quran is contradicting itself." That's not true, right? The reality is that these words were integrated into the Arabic language way before the revelation happened, and it became known as Arabic because, had it been perceived that if it's perceived as an inconsistency by the idol worshippers from Quraysh, they would have pointed out, right? Because remember, they were at their peak of their linguistic capabilities. And so if the Quran was revealed and it had words that were not Arabic, they would at least point it out to it because it would be considered a flaw. Remember, they had pride in that language, and so it would have been considered a flaw. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so we finished the first two verses, if I'm not mistaken. We had started on the third, part of the third. I was hoping to do it last week. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص بما أوحينا إليك هذا القرآن وإن كنت من قبله لمن الغافلين. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this third verse, he's telling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص. We relate to you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best of stories, أحسن القصص, the best of stories, in what we have revealed, بما أوحينا إليك, we have revealed to you of this Quran, وإن كنت من قبله لمن الغافلين, although you were before it among the unaware, right? The unaware of them, al-ghafilin. So I'm going to start with the word نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص. The word قصص, right, is plural for, so it's plural for stories, right? قصص is the plural for stories. The singular is قصة, which is a story, which comes from the root word قصة, قصة, right? Remember Surah Al-Kahf? فَارْتَدَّا عَلَى آثَارِهِمَا قَصَصًا. Do you guys remember that? Right? When Ibrahim alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, was with Yusha, and they had lost the fish that they had, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَارْتَدَّا عَلَى آثَارِهِمَا قَصَصًا. Right? The same root, قَصَّة. So, the meaning, قَصَّة means to follow the footsteps in the sand. فَارْتَدَّا عَلَى آثَارِهِمَا, the case is قَصَصًا. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned that, as I mentioned in Surah Musa alayhi salam, and so they returned, retracting their footsteps. And so the question is, if we look at the root word, and we look at saying stories, it's kind of transferred to talking about stories. What does a story have to do with following footsteps? Because you have to understand the language a little bit, right? This is kind of like one of those things that's interesting. So what does saying stories have to do with following footsteps? So somebody guess, please. I like interaction. Why do you say it to people? Why, okay, I don't know if you guys say stories anymore. I know, we're in the modern age of phones. But do you guys ever heard of stories? Kids? Do your parents read? No, forget about your parents. I'm sorry, I don't mean forget about them. But at school, is there stories? No, not even school? Am I that old? All right, the elder generation. You guys heard of stories? طيب, why do you read stories if you read them? Or why do you relate them to your kids? Or why did your parents read them to you, or in the school you read them? Yes. To pass on cultural heritage. Okay. to get the wisdom from it. And what's the point of that? You follow it. Does it make sense now? Right? And so the whole point of is when we talk about when you listen to someone's story, and we're talking about real story. Sometimes even it's fictional. People say fictional stories a lot of times. Sometimes as a like as a reminder or a wisdom or like something around that area, the moral of the story essentially. So by listening to someone's story, we're kind of retracting their life. For example, right? When you talk about somebody's story, their biography especially, you're kind of retracing their life. In a way, you're following them. Is that clear? Right. So, in this case, I want to bring your attention to almost a third of the Quran content is stories. Is that right? There's rules and regulations, of course. There's aspects of our belief system. And then there is stories. Those are the three components, generally speaking. Okay? Aqeedah, I clumped it all, even if it talks about Allah and Tawheed, but our belief system, rules and regulations, and stories. طيب. What does that teach us about stories? People learn more with examples. That's true. That is true. Okay, history has a attraction. Good, excellent. People always want to listen to it, which is true, right? And so with this, this aspect of, of how Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is saying, "Nahnu qussu alayka ahsan al-qasas," and the fact that a third of the Quran is filled with stories, it teaches us that not to ever underestimate the moving power of stories. Stories tend to have a strength to them. Grabs our attention, and it teaches a lot of lessons. People are more likely to remember a story than to remember you giving them an order. Right? They'll tend to remember stories more than anything else. Stories have the ability to inspire people. Okay, even if it's like the form of biographies or whatever the case is, and it will remain in our thoughts and our memories more than a order ever remains, or an instruction. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he, in this specific story, for example, when he revealed it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we mentioned, in a time where, the Prophet had lost his wife, he has lost Khadija radiallahu anha, he had lost his uncle, and people of Ta'if rejected him. And so this was to strengthen the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the believers around him. And so the story of Yusuf did that. And similarly, reading stories of other prophets and the seerah of other prophets and the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ himself have the ability to strengthen us on its own. Right? It grabs our attention. We learn a lot from those stories. Now that being said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described, like in Surah Yusuf, He called it Ahsan al-Qasas, the best of stories. What does that mean? I'm asking a lot of questions today, right? It's my way to get you to think a little bit. And yes, I just came from traveling, so I'm a bit exhausted. So I'm trying to make you give the lecture. I'm joking. Not the tired part, but by making you give the lecture. But the question is why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe, if you read this, نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ أَحْسَنَ الْقَصَصِ, right? What does that mean to you? We relate to you the best of stories. Best of stories, what does that mean? Yes. Say that again. The best type of stories to influence you. Are we talking about Surah Yusuf or just all the stories? Surah Yusuf specifically, right? طيب. Any other interpretation? Okay. All right. So that can be combined with that. And that's, by the way, one of the interpretations is that out of all the excellent stories of the Quran, story of Yusuf is the best. right? Because if you look at it, it's an entire full story from the beginning all the way to the end, right? And this is unique for any surah of the Quran. It's the only story that from start to end is just about one individual, which is Yusuf alayhi salam, telling us a complete story, right? Focus entirely on one prophet. That's one interpretation. The other interpretation is that this verse actually means that every story Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had described in the Quran is told in the best possible way. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a general statement. نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ أَحْسَنَ الْقَصَصِ. We relate to you the best of stories. And then he mentioned a story. Which means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he mentions a story or relates it in the Quran, it's told in the best possible way. Right? And so it's the framing and the location of every Quranic story, like where it's placed, how it's placed, the length of it, the details associated with it, right? What is omitted from it, what is not omitted from it. All this is perfectly decided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so it could never be anything better. Right? And I like that general meaning, it's true. But by the way, both meanings don't have to be separate. That meaning can be true, and Surah Yusuf is an example of that. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, when he said that, he said, نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص بما أوحينا إليك هذا القرآن وإن كنت من قبله لمن الغافلين. So he described the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, although you were before it among the unaware, al-ghafilin, the unaware. طيب, is Allah criticizing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? No. Explain. No. It's talking about, so this verse is talking to the Prophet ﷺ. He's telling them, even although you were before it, right, you are among the unaware. So is that a criticization of the Prophet ﷺ? You said no, I said explain. It's a fact. Okay, before revelation, the Prophet ﷺ was not aware of it. That makes sense. Now, what you notice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not call the Prophet ﷺ ignorant. He didn't say min al-jahilin. He said min al-ghafilin. Two different things. Because essentially, when you say the Prophet ﷺ is unaware, it highlights that it's not a flaw, right, or something that is blameworthy, because the entire world, before revelation or without revelation, they have no knowledge. They're unaware, right? And this verse is actually a reminder for us that the Surah Yusuf is one of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like the story, right, is one of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because without it, we would not know the complete story of Yusuf alayhi salam, right? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who lived in Mecca without access to Christians or Jewish people or their books, right? Definitely he's unaware of it, okay? He's unaware of what's happening. And he would not have known the story of Yusuf alayhi salam have it not been that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has informed him, right? And this is why it's one of the proofs of prophethood. And this is why, by the way, the Jewish people, when people, I remember I mentioned the cause of revelation. I said there's two reasons. One was the companion that might have asked the Prophet ﷺ to relate to us a story, and the other one is the people of Quraysh wanted to stop the Prophet ﷺ, prove that he's not a prophet, and so they went to some of the Jewish scholars. They traveled and they got information from them, and they told the people of Quraysh, go back and ask Muhammad, how did the Bani Israel, the Israelites, how did they end up in Egypt? Because they actually thought that this would be like some sort of a fatal blow to the reputation and credibility of the Prophet ﷺ, because they were certain nobody in the Arabian Peninsula knew about this, because nobody had access to their knowledge, their texts. They were very protective of it. In fact, a lot of in that time, many for example, the priests and the Christian scholars, they would prevent the public from having access to the texts. So they only kept that knowledge to themselves. I want you to compare that to Islam. On the other hand, the Prophet ﷺ had forbid that any sort of knowledge to be hidden. In fact, there's a punishment associated with, not relaying knowledge. There's a punishment associated with it. طيب. Well, not necessarily from the Arab, actually from even themselves. Like the priests, for example, they did not relate to the public because they wanted to have that superiority, that only access to the divine. And so you have to go through them, right? Once again, in Islam, it's different. In Islam, the knowledge is available. You just have to seek it. Now, if you don't have it, then you have to ask, right? See the difference? On the other side, what they wanted is you can only seek it through them. Right? Hold on. But by the way, this is also remember this whole, it was known that the Prophet ﷺ had no access, or even the Arabs, generally speaking, they had no access to information. And that is why many of the Jewish and Christian scholars in the Arabic world, they felt compelled to admit that the Prophet ﷺ definitely was a prophet, right? Even if some later found excuses to say that the prophethood did not apply to them. So they would call him the prophet to the Arabs. He's only the prophet for the Arabs. He's not for us. Even though they admit that he's a prophet. Right? طيب. Now, by not describing the Prophet ﷺ as being ignorant, there's a subtle divine instruction for us as believers, as Muslims, to be very careful and how we talk about the Prophet ﷺ, to guard the rank and status of the Prophet ﷺ at all times, even when we're speaking about him ﷺ. Okay? And so this is kind of like a subtle reminder associated with that. Right. Now when the Prophet ﷺ, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described this Quran to have the best of stories, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the story of Yusuf and his father and his brothers, and this beautiful story. And so we go to the next verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes into the story. He said, إِذْ قَالَ يُوسُفُ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِ إِنِّي رَأَيْتُ أَحَدَ عَشَرَ كَوْكَبًا وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ رَأَيْتُمْ لِي سَاجِدِينَ قال يا بني لا تقصص رؤيتك على إخوتك فيكيد لك كيدا إن الشيطان للإنسان عدو مبين. And so this is verse number 4 and number 5, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the meaning of the translation of the meaning of those verses is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, إذ قال Yusuf. So إذ over here is kind of indicating this is a story of these stories mentioned. When Yusuf alayhi salam told his father, "O father, indeed I have seen," right? Seen meaning what? In a vision, right? In a dream. I've seen 11 كوكبا. I've seen 11 stars, and the sun and the moon, I saw them prostrating to me. And then Yaqub alayhi salam responded to his son by telling him, "O my son, do not relate this your vision to your brothers, or they will they will contrive against you a plan. Like they will create a plan against you." And then he said, indeed the shaitan, right, to the human, to the man, is a manifested enemy, a clear enemy. طيب. So this is the first scene of the story. This is how it starts. That's the opening scene of the story, where Yusuf alayhi salam, he was said to be at around the age of 7 years old. So he was a child, 7 years old, while he was in Canaan. Right, so Canaan was, I guess, part of modern day. What it is Palestine and Syria. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to return Palestine to the Muslims and to free it from the occupiers of that land. Ameen. He told the Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, he said that he's seen a vision. Right, that vision essentially is, as we mentioned, the sun and the moon and 11 stars are prostrating to him. And the response of his father was what? Not to mention it to his brothers, right? Now, the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam were half siblings. So Yusuf and his brother, younger brother, were from the same mother, but his 11 other siblings were from a different mother. So they have siblings. And he told him the reason, right? The reason not to do it. And it is the shaitan is a clear enemy to the human beings. So most scholars of tafsir say that the 11 stars symbolize the siblings, and the moon symbolizes the, not the mother? Mother or father? Maybe mother, maybe father. So there's no third choice, right? So is the moon the father or the mother? The son should be father? You know, I could stir the pot over here, Sheikh. Is your wife here? Do you want me to stir the pot a little bit? Why are you the son? Why not her? By the way, in the Arabic language, the moon is masculine. The sun is feminine. Okay? So it's not, you can't say the sun is the father, because that's feminine, right? And so the moon is the father, the sun is the mother, right? Many of the people, the people of tafsir say that. So this is based on some report that it was Yaqub alayhi salam that made that interpretation, right? It was reported that Yaqub alayhi salam is the one that made that interpretation. Now Yaqub alayhi salam also mentioned that Yusuf alayhi salam, essentially in that interpretation, Yaqub had mentioned to Yusuf that he would transition from one state to another state, right? And that he will move from a place to a place, and rank to rank or state to state, until eventually they would all submit to Yusuf alayhi salam, right? And prostrate in respect to honor Yusuf alayhi salam. Okay? They would prostrate in respect to Yusuf alayhi salam. And Yaqub also mentioned that Allah will choose Yusuf alayhi salam and teach him the interpretation of the visions and complete his favor upon him and his family. Okay? This is in the latter verses. We'll come to it inshallah. طيب. If we go to that verse, إذ قال, a lot of times you'll see stories begin with إذ or وإذ. So it happens quite often in the Quran, right before it mentions, one of those things. In English, it means kind of they translate it usually as mention when, right? Or remember when. Like once upon a time, right? But I don't like that, right? Just remember men or mention when, right? So remember when Yusuf, or mention when Yusuf stated to his father, and you go forth, right? وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ يَا قَوْمِ, right? And and remember when, or mention when Musa told his people, "Oh my people." وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ وَرَبِّ أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى, and mention when Ibrahim said, "Oh my Lord, show me how do you resurrect the dead." You'll see that all the time. This is what it means essentially. Okay. So, but once upon a time is more like Disney stories, but that's okay. طيب. So why was the moon and the sun interpreted as the father and the son? Father and the mother. One of the reasons is that when actually why the moon why are the sun and the moon, why do they symbolize the father and the mother? Yeah, I like that one. Right? You get that, kids? So your parents are the source of light in your life. Okay? Yes. You're objecting now? No? Okay, good. Go. Without it, the earth would not stay the same. Okay, I like that one. All right. So, yes. They did not exist? Oh, if they did not exist? Will collapse? I would say they'll be in darkness. So without them, we'll be in a state of darkness, right? That we'd have no guide, especially when talking about initial children and so forth. So essentially, that's the reality. As children, any child, as they grow up, their parents are the most pronounced symbols of light and instruction in their lives. They're the ones that provide them with that guidance initially. And hence, take notes, we should treasure them, right? Even if you're old, by the way, right? You still treasure them while they're still alive, because when they're gone, right, there's some darkness that comes in our lives. Type. But then there's the stars, right? The stars are symbolized of the siblings, which we can actually turn to. So in this case, the next of kins or the siblings can provide us with some sort of emotional support in times of darkness, right? In the absence of the parents. And so they would also provide us with that guide or warmth or whatever the case is. But overall, essentially it's pointing out to that the family members can be a valuable source that would help us to navigate through our life, right? To bring to us stability in this world. Wallahu a'lam. Now, if you notice, Yusuf alayhi salam, who did he choose to tell his dream? His father. So why did he go to his father and not his mother? Because he's the son, right? No, seriously, why? Yes. Because what? I know. Why did he go to the father, not the mother? Okay, because he knew he's a prophet. That is true. Essentially, that's what it is. Right? Because Yusuf alayhi salam knew that his father was a prophet, and so identifying which vision or inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this case, so as a prophet, he would be able to tell Yusuf whether this was a true inspiration, a true vision, or just a regular dream, right? Adghathu ahlam, or is it from the shaitan? Because those are three different types. So dreams are either inspiration from Allah, or inspiration from the shaitan, or just kind of gibberish daily dreams, okay? And a prophet would know which one it is. But also, deciphering what those dreams mean, we have to realize is a discipline. Like literally, it is a discipline. This is why it's a mistake to think that every sheikh or every imam of a masjid knows how to interpret it. Okay? That's not true. So if you have something that you're worried about, I know we try to reach to most people, imams and scholars, they're grounded in a lot of the disciplines, but dreams are not usually something they go into most of the time. Sometimes, by the way, it's a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a gift that is given to individuals that they're actually able and understand how to interpret dreams. But it's a discipline that requires specific people that you can trust to talk to and ask about them. Not anybody can interpret dreams, right? Not anybody can interpret. I'm talking about inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so prophets definitely are able to do that, right? Even a lot of times the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or Prophet Muhammad, people would come to him and he would ask actually after Fajr, he said, "Hal minkum man ra'a ru'ya?" Right? Does anybody have seen a vision, inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I would decipher it for him? But also, which means that, so Yusuf went to his father because he's a prophet, and so he knows that if it's an inspiration, that his father would be able to correctly interpret it. And also his father definitely wishes him well, right? Every father wishes goodness for his child. Now, what this does is it tells us that we should be cautious on who we trust with our dreams, right? And we should never take dreams to the wrong person. In fact, this is mentioned, from the Prophet ﷺ, in Sunan Tirmidhi, Abu Razin. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Ru'ya al-mu'min juz'un." So the inspiration or the vision of the believer is a portion. Juz'un min arba'ina juz'a is a portion of 40 portions. Min al-nubuwwa, of prophethood, right? It doesn't mean the person who sees visions is a prophet, but because prophethood, an aspect of it is seeing the unseen. And so this is kind of like a symbol of it, right? This is a symbol of it, wallahu a'lam. And so he said the Prophet said, وَهِيَ عَلَى رَجُلٍ طَائِرٍ. So it is above the individual as if it's a bird, right? مَا لَمْ يُحَدِّثْ بِهَا, as long as he doesn't relate to other people, like mention to other people, فإذا تحدث بها سقطت. And so if he mentions it, then it will fall, right? It will fall upon the individual. And so the narrator says, he said, I think the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَا تُحَدِّثْ بِهَا إِلَّا لَبِيبًا أَوْ حَبِيبًا, and do not relate it to except a person who is labib, which is intelligent, or a beloved person. So only relate your visions to a person who is intelligent or somebody who is beloved to you, like that actually loves you. So the meaning of this hadith essentially is that our visions are something that is kind of like floating, it's in the air, right? Like a bird has not landed. So your vision does not land until it becomes interpreted. Once it's interpreted, it will fall based on how it was interpreted. Is that clear? This is why you should be very careful who you relay those dreams to. And so the Prophet ﷺ directed us to not relate except to a person, like this vision, except a person who is intelligent, who has the capability of understanding how to interpret dreams, because they'll know whether they should tell you or not. Right? And when they tell you, how they would tell you. Because sometimes they'll remain silent and tell you, like, I don't want to interpret it. Or a person who loves you, right? Habib is a person who loves you because he would not interpret except in a way that would please you, right? Essentially. And so, once again, for prophets, I want to compare this. Prophets' visions are, because we know Yusuf alayhi salam is a prophet, their visions are wahy, an inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But for us, it's an inspiration also, but doesn't mean it's a revelation. For prophets, it actually is a revelation. It's an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he saw that he was sacrificing his son, and he told it to Ismail told him, do what you're ordered. So he understood this. I'm saying this why? Because I don't want any of us seeing a vision, a dream, that they're sacrificing their son at the Kaaba. Please don't take him to the Kaaba and try to do that. It has another interpretation, okay? Or if you saw a dream that tells you, I don't know, this is haram for you, or for the ummah. No, it doesn't mean anything. It might be directing you to do something, but it doesn't mean it's a revelation or a source of ruling and so forth. It's not like the prophets. طيب. So Yusuf alayhi salam correctly assumed that his father would give him the best advice, right? He assumed that his father would give him the time to listen to him. And this is an important lesson for us to learn, is that no matter how busy we are, we should always give time to our loved ones when they ask for it, right? Especially parents towards their children, because it means something to that person that you hear them out. It means that you're available for them, that you care about their time. Right? And I understand sometimes we're very busy, but also this goes also for the children, right? When your parents want to spend time with you, right, you leave that console, you leave that phone, right, and you spend that time with them. You give them your attention. It's a relationship that goes back and forth, but the whole aspect is the importance of remembering that we should give time to our loved ones. Right? And this is something that Prophet ﷺ did, by the way. Right? He would always dedicate time for his friends. Whenever they needed something from him, he would listen to them. He would dedicate time for his wife, for his wives, for his daughter, for his grandchildren. Right? And he would do that. Whoever wants something of the Prophet ﷺ, he would give them that time and opportunity. طيب. So Yaqub alayhi salam, he said, قال يا بني لا تقصص رؤيتك على إخوتك فيكيد لك كيدا إن الشيطان كان للإنسان عدو مبين. And so we mentioned the meaning of this is that Yaqub had advised his son. He said, do not relate this vision to your siblings until the end, where he told him that the shaitan is a clear enemy. And so this was how Yaqub responded. Now I want you to look at how he responded. He said, Yusuf said, Ya abati. Right? Ya abati inni ra'aytu ahad ashara kawkaban. How did Yaqub respond? He said, Ya bunay. Right? Ya bunay. So he reciprocated in the same manner. I don't know if you were with me here when we were talking about Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was talking to his father on Friday. The dialogue between Ibrahim and his father. He said, Ya abati, Ya abati, Ya abati, several times. يا أبت لا تعبد الشيطان, don't worship the shaitan. يا أبت إني قد جاءني من العلم. يا أبت is an endearing form, right? Ya bunay is also an endearing form. And so this happened, this was the type of conversation that Yusuf had with his father and his father had with Yusuf alayhi salam. And so what this tells us is that we should show a similar response to how people, I guess in a good way. Let me paraphrase this. Because somebody deals with you in a bad way, you don't reciprocate it. But we're commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reciprocate even a certain greeting with something that is of equal or better. So if somebody says Assalamu alaikum, you say Wa alaikum assalam, minimum. If they say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, you say Wa rahmatullah, right? Minimum. But you can also go a bit more, right? You can respond and say Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay? طيب. We also learned that expression of endearment are expression of love. And so it's okay, in fact, actually it's encouraged that we use it with one another. Especially when we talk about family members, right? Between the household, using endearing words is something that is beneficial. In fact, even the Prophet ﷺ, when he would call his wife, Aisha for example, right? He would call her Ya Aish, right? Ya Aish, right? Or sometimes we say Ya Humayra. Humayra means what? Oh, I just realized. We have Humayra here, right? What does that mean? Red cheeks, right? It means the one with the red cheeks. So it's endearing terminologies, right? And even the Prophet ﷺ, he's told Aisha, he said, I know when you are pleased with me, and I know when you are angry with me. She said, how do you know? He said, when you are pleased with me and you want to swear, you say, La wa Rabb Muhammad. Oh, by the Lord of Muhammad. It's like an endearing thing. And she said, when you're mad at me, you'd say, La wa Rabbi Ibrahim. By the Lord of Ibrahim. Right? So that thing is something, it brings people closer. And so also when parents start calling their children, right? Like, my son, or I don't know, each language has its way of dealing with things, but even giving them, nicknames, right? And so forth. When the Prophet ﷺ would go see his grandchildren, he would say, Aina lukka, right? Aina lukka, right? Lukka is like a terminology of a person who, just describing something about them. So he's not saying, where's al-Hasan or Hussein? He said, Aina lukka, like it's an endearing terminology. طيب. Now Yaqub ordered Yusuf alayhi salam not to tell his brothers about his vision, or else they might plot against him, and that the shaitan is an enemy, right? And so honestly, there's several lessons we can extract from the order of Yaqub. Several lessons over here. What are some of those lessons? I want you to kind of tell me what you can understand from this. That not everyone is your friend? Even your brother is a sheikh? True, possibly. Okay. They might interpret the dream differently. Well, he said that تقصص رؤياك على أخوتك. So he already so obviously this dream, is it something good or bad? It's good. This dream is something that is good, beneficial. And so he told him, don't relay it to your siblings, because they will plot against you, and the shaitan is a clear enemy. So he put that entire sentence. There's a lot of things we can learn from it. Yes. I told you I like him. MashaAllah, Allah Mubarak. Jealousy, right? That is another thing. Shaitan might distract you, right? So jealousy, I'm going to just comment on that. That's really important, right? But obviously that jealousy came because we flaunted something, right? And so it tells us that we should not be naive and share or flaunt all of our blessings with everyone, okay? Rather, we should conceal them, except from those who we trust the most, right? Those that would share that joy with us. Contrary to what has happened in our modern world. What happens in our modern world? Right? Social media. Right? Even the burger that they're eating, they're sharing it with everybody. Like, look at the burger I'm eating, right? Look at the ring my husband got me. Look at where we're going for a vacation. Look at... Do you see this? Like, this is very dangerous. Right? This is something contrary to what we should be doing. We should not be sharing our blessings, because there will always be others that might not have that blessing, that might see you, and that will result into what? Jealousy. Right? This whole thing of sharing with everybody is not a good idea. Right? It's the opposite. Now, once again, I'm not saying social media is like, haram or anything like that. No, social media is a tool. You choose how to use that tool. You either use it for your benefit, right? For example, sharing positive things, whatever the case is, announcements. It's a tool, right? Or you can share your life, whatever you like it. But always also understand that as you are seeing this, that people always only put what is the best in their life. Right? They never put the negative, right? Like, oh, my husband got any flowers. She's not going to mention the fight last night that caused the flowers to come, right? Or look, my wife made me breakfast, right? And he's not going to mention the, the what? That his wife is a gold digger? There was no dinner. Oh, sorry. I'm like, what? Okay, fine, that there was no dinner. I think that's the better thing, right? Allahu musta'an. Speak louder, ya Sheikh. I should give you a mic. You're getting me in trouble here. Anyway, you guys get the point, right? طيب. So, once again, this is because jealousy, right, might strike the heart of others. And jealousy is really that burning desire to have what someone else has, right? In fact, not just that, but it's also mixed with, it actually has a selfish desire. Like, you want that for yourself, with believing that other person doesn't deserve it. That's what jealousy is, essentially, right? I'm talking about the negative jealousy. Is you want to get it for yourself. You desire, you have the right to do it. You want it. Why does that other person have it? And so, this sensation of jealousy contradicts what we're supposed to have in terms of iman, in the divine wisdom and decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in essence, what we're doing is we're objecting to the decree of Allah that this individual has this and I don't have it. Why does he have it and I don't have it? It should be removed from him and given to me, because you feel that you are more rightful. So essentially you're saying Allah made a mistake. Whether you like it or not, this is if you kind of interpret it and look at it, essentially that's what it necessitates. And the Prophet ﷺ also warned of envy, right? So I'm not talking about just jealousy, I'm talking about envy actually, hasad, right? Hasad is what I'm talking about. Now, there is a good form of jealousy, is that when you see somebody that has something good, you want to be like them. That is fine, especially if it's in good things. I'm not saying things that are haram, but I'm talking about good things, such as a person who has memorized the Quran, or they engage in righteous activities, or they have, mashallah, good character, moral values. You want to be like them. That's positive. Okay, that kind of jealousy is appropriate. But envy is what is being prohibited. Yes. I know I cannot hear you. Okay, so the reason I wanted to use the word envy a bit more is because it's just more of a semantic in the English language. So in the English language, jealousy is sometimes used as that you're jealous that a person, for example, is getting attention and not you, or that a person, they scored and you did not score, or they got something, you didn't have something. Envy is a bit more than that, right? Although jealousy can also be used as a form of envy, right? But we're really talking about the envy, that feeling of like, that burning desire inside, that like, you're just jealous this person has something and that you don't. Envy is more clear in the fact that it's not just that you want it for yourself, but it includes that you deserve it and you want it taken away from them. Right? So that is what hasad is. And the Prophet ﷺ said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْحَسَدِ. He said, beware of al-hasad. إِيَّاكُمْ, like be careful, stay away from it. فَإِنَّ الْحَسَدَ يَأْكُلُ الْحَسَنَاتِ كَمَا تَأْكُلُ النَّارُ الْحَطَبِ. Because envy eats, right? Will devour your hasanat, similar to how the fire devours wood. Right? Devours wood. There's a reason behind it, because the reason it devours the hasanat is because the person who has envy, what it leads them usually to do, is quite often to mention that person that they envy in negative ways. They'll backbite them, right? Their name would mention, you're like, yeah, that guy, you don't know, like you really don't know how he is, right? He's all not that, like, I heard this about him. What's driving you is that envy, right? And so it will eat at your hasanat. Sometimes it leads people to even take actions to harm the other person because they're envious of them, right? To plot against them because, let's say, if it's in a work position, that if they get them fired, they will take that position, right? Or to make them look bad against their boss because they want to look good against them. So it will lead the individual to commit things that are haram, and so it will eat away at their hasanat. Yes? No, having hasad in itself is not a good thing, but acting upon it makes it. So that feeling, right, is a disease of the heart. Now, if it stays like that, then there's no sins associated, unless you're in your mind, you're objecting to Allah's decree. Why, Allah, did you give him and not me? This is when it becomes more of a sin. But as long as there's disease in the heart and it stays there, then it stays there. But for most people, what happens is they'll act upon it. Now, some people are so weak to the point that even dreams of others might spark envy. Like the brothers of Yusuf. Type. Yes. So once again, I said we need to differentiate between, so the hasad, there's a permissible form of hasad, which is that you desire to have the same as another individual, right? Without the sense of jealousy of them, without wanting to be removed. Such as a person who memorized the Quran. You wish you memorized the Quran like them so you can recite like them. You wish you had wealth like that rich person who gives in sadaqah so you can give in sadaqah. Right? That's a good thing. Of course, when it comes to religious stuff, it is positive. When it comes to worldly things, it's neutral. There's no reward associated with it. Right? But when it comes to righteous things, there's a reward associated with it. Right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives, because of that intention that you have, gives you a reward for that intention. Hold on. طيب. Yaqub alayhi salam, if you notice, he talked to Yusuf about his brothers. Did he talk to him about them in a positive way or a negative way? It insinuated something positive or negative? It's negative, right? Isn't that technically ghiba? Is that ghiba or not? Why not? طيب, what is ghiba? Okay, Yaqub alayhi salam said something about someone. No. He said, لا تقصص رؤيتك على إخوتك فيكيد لك كيدا. فيكيد لك كيدا. Right? It's a warning. No, it's not true. Even if it's a warning, you warn against a good person or a bad person? Neutral? Really? You don't warn from neutrals, the Sheikh. From a bad person, so he's still insinuating that they are bad. So is that ghiba? No. I know you guys are going to say no because it's a prophet. Which is true, by the way. Like the prophets, alhamdulillah, they don't commit sins. But when I point out, it's not considered a ghiba. So saying something negative about a person where if they were present, they would be upset about it, is a ghiba. However, it is not considered ghiba or backbiting if there is no way to ward off harm without mentioning that specific person. Right? Don't go into business with him because he is dishonest. Don't go to business with her because she has, for example, stolen money from her previous partners. For example, right? So you can't warn a person without specifically mentioning something about them. That is not considered a ghiba. And Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he mentioned that there are several things, like there's several situations where it would be not considered a ghiba, right? Whether, for example, it's a witness talking about somebody, or somebody takes your advice about a specific person, for example, for marriage or partnership, whatever the case is, in a situation where, you are talking to a judge, seeking a fatwa from like a scholar. So you mentioned something about your children or your spouses or your parents or partners or whatever the case is, like business partners. You mentioned something about them to get a fatwa, and so there's certain situations where you have to start mentioning that individual specific things. Of course, if you can omit, speak in third person, just not mention their name, be better. But some situations you just can't do it, right? Wallahu a'lam. طيب. Well, yeah, don't talk to that person because so forth. Which brings me to the next point. If you notice, we said how old was Yusuf alayhi salam? Some said 7, right around that age. Yaqub alayhi salam, he didn't just tell him, don't tell your brothers. What did he do? He explained, right? He explained why. Now, this is quite often, this is actually something that's important when we are speaking even to children, to explain to them, because it justifies why we're telling them what to do, and it convinces them, and at the same time respects their intelligence. Right? Respects their intelligence. It also reinforces that this decision comes out of genuine care and understanding of the reality of the situation. Right? The child would understand this. Like, we understand the situation and we're doing this out of care for you. Now, this methodology is very beneficial because it could help the child develop into a person who thinks for themselves and doesn't just accept something because somebody ordered them or pressured them to do it. Right? So this is very important. Whenever a child asks a parent why, they should never say, because I said so. Does that sound familiar? Right? Or otherwise I'm going to ground you. Right? No, and by the way, sometimes as parents we get frustrated because sometimes we don't know why. We do it because our parents told us to do it. Right? That's not true in every situation, right? But just sometimes we don't think about it. Right? But explaining at a level that is suitable for that child is important. Of course, yes, sometimes the child is not prepared for understanding. For example, an infant who wants to put a knife into the electric socket and you stop them and they're like 2 years old. No matter what you explain, they're not going to understand, right? They just want to put their finger in that socket and you're preventing them. And so yes, there are certain circumstances like that. But whenever they get a chance to explain to others why this order is there, then it's beneficial, right? It's not meant so that they would argue, even though some kids would argue, which is, by the way, is a sign of their intelligence also. So some children will say, oh, okay. Some children will say, okay, but why can't we do this instead? They will actually sometimes offer you solutions, which is great. It's amazing. Like that should be encouraged. And even if it's not a great solution, you explain to them why it's not the best solution. You commend them for it, and this is great. But this solution, let's say the problem is it with this. This is why we do it this way, right? Of course, there's certain circumstances where, like, why don't we eat? Like, why don't we? Like, you can explain why don't we drink alcohol? Wisdom's behind it. But why don't we eat animals that are, like, for example, why don't we eat donkeys, right, or pork? In the end, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us, but you can explain and say when Allah orders not to do something, it is to practice from harm, and sometimes we might not know this harm, but Allah knows what it is. We might discover it in the future. That is sufficient enough, right? It gives the child or the individual, it respects their intellect and gives them satisfaction of that response and answer. طيب. I would not advise telling your parents anything about your spouses. All right, no, generally speaking, I'm being honest. So this is not a counseling session. But generally speaking, right, like you should always maintain and try to resolve whatever conflict there is at home, okay? Because usually when you're upset about something or your spouse did something and then you complain to your parents and then you and your spouse make up, your parents are sitting there just kind of angry about what they did, right? And then, like, you made up with, like, your spouse and everything is rosy and peachy, and your parents are sitting there like, oh, they did this to my son, they did this to my daughter, right? It's not a good idea, right? Not the best idea. It's always better to keep whatever there is in between them. Of course, there's some circumstances or situations where things have, like, you're unable to resolve what's in between you, that sometimes you need the wisdom of, like, the parents or the elders. Is it considered a ghiba? Well, it depends what you're talking about. It really depends what you're talking about. Huh? No, not any normal situation. I think we should discuss this in a separate setting, inshallah. Let's get back to the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. All right, so Yusuf alayhi salam, Yaqub alayhi salam, and what we stated. So when Yaqub alayhi salam did what he did, we can also notice that what he did actually is he tried to take active steps to keep peace and harmony in his family. Because if Yusuf alayhi salam tells them this, then they become jealous. What are they going to do? They're going to argue, they're going to fight, there's, like, tension. And so we should always try to do the same thing. Not just with our family members, but also extended family members and friends. We are aware of the nature of our family members, how they are. Like Yaqub alayhi salam understood the nature of his children. And so he reacted, and he reacted appropriately based on the knowledge of his children. And so we tend to know how our family members are, for example, or our friends are. And so we should always do things in a way that would bring harmony and not bring discord, right? Or, like, or bring unwanted harm. We should always try to prevent that. طيب. What else can we learn from this? Okay. Oh, so you're explaining why they might have been jealous? Because they were expecting to be one of the chosen ones, but Yusuf was the chosen one. Possibly. Possibly. Wallahu a'lam. طيب. No, he means like a prophet. So Yusuf alayhi salam was a prophet. His siblings were not prophets. No. Although there is an opinion that, like, they were prophets, but it's a very weak opinion, because we know prophets don't sin, right? And what they did was obviously something that is a sin. Let alone diseases of the heart that is something that prophets are protected from the beginning. Wallahu a'lam. Binyamin, what's wrong with him? Yeah, that time he was small. No, he was not involved. So was he a prophet? I don't think he was. Hold on. طيب. Why did Yaqub alayhi salam mention the shaitan? What is he pointing out to? He mentioned the brothers, they will plot, and then he mentioned the shaitan. What does the shaitan have to do in this entire thing? Huh? He adds to the conflict. He creates conflict. That is true. So, one of the shaitan's way to lead us astray is to manipulate our ego and jealousy. Manipulate our ego and jealousy, leading us to take actions that are prohibited. Qabil and Habil. Right? What did the shaitan play on? The whole jealousy aspect. Right? It works very slowly until one killed the other. Right? Right? So this is something we have to be aware about. This is how the shaitan does things. He will play at our ego and our jealousy and the diseases of the heart. And he's very, the shayateen are very good at that. And so we have to be careful with these things. Yaqub also taught Yusuf alayhi salam a very interesting lesson, that no matter what an individual does, right, no matter what evil person does, the shaitan is the one that instigates it and exasperates it, right, increases it, makes it more. So Yaqub, what he's actually doing is he's almost acquitting. So, okay, actually he's not doing that. I apologize. He's not acquitting the siblings of Yusuf from the wrongdoing, but he's just mentioning how the shaitan also plays a part in it. And so they're susceptible to the shaitan, essentially. Now this perspective, this view, allows us to find a way out when another person does something wrong for us, right? What does that mean? What I'm trying to point out is that it's an Islamic etiquette. It's an Islamic etiquette to remove the blame from an individual and transfer it to the shaitan as much as possible, because it allows us to do two things. It allows us, to easier forgive that person. Right? It makes it easier for us to forgive that individual. And the second, it opens the doors for evildoers and sinners to repent from their mistakes, right? And come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It makes us understand that there is good in us and that we're not entirely bad. It's a problem when a person thinks their inner thought, their inner speech is, I am bad, I am not good, I am evil, right? A person who thinks like that, what are the chances of succeeding being righteous? It's not very, very high, right? They bring themselves down. But when they think I am good, right? I have good in me, but I also can be deceived. And so they try and they ask for repentance. But once again, also as individuals, we were wronged. It gives us the ability sometimes to easier forgive the other person when we blame it on the shaitan. That there's something good in that person, they just committed a sin, they were deceived in it. Wallahu a'lam. طيب. Now, Yaqub described the shaitan as a clear enemy. And obviously we can see the shaitan, right? Is that correct? You guys are just nodding yes. Can we see the shaitan? I'll be worried if you see him. Right? No, we can't see them. But what does it mean that they're a clear enemy? Like transparent? They're very what? Easy to? It's easy for us to listen to them. Okay. That is true. So when somebody says this is a clear enemy, what are they trying to tell you? It, true enemy. So don't think that they're trying to advise you. Like don't doubt that. Right? There's no two ways about it. Make no mistake about this. This is a staunch enemy, a clear enemy. Now, what this also tells us is that that enemy would not hesitate or back away ever. They're a clear enemy. They will always do things and plot against you one way or another. And so they're always present, always waiting to bring you down. And this makes us that we should be very cautious, okay, about not being deceived. You know, sometimes we tend to do things that kind of deceive ourselves, and it's actually from the shaitan. Whenever we think that we have control over a sin, that's a deception. I can stop whenever I want, okay? That's a deception from the shaitan. Or, you know, I will do it this time and repent. That's a deception from the shaitan. This is us, like, you know, convincing ourselves essentially that, like, you know, we will do better later. This is one of the gateways of the shaitan. Right? That thought process, don't take it lightly. It is meant to bring you down. And the shaitan is always smart. He knows that if he tells you do something big right away, you won't do it. He knows he's got to reel you in slowly. Right? Bring you in very slowly. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُ خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ. Do not follow the steps of the shaitan. The shaitan doesn't take you to a leap and jump. It takes you through little baby steps. You, like, you know, slowly, like, you know, he takes you into the, like, you know, into the water, right? First, like, you know, you put your foot in there. Like, you know, I can still get out. And then you take another step, and then you take another step, and you know, all of a sudden you are in the middle of the ocean, and the land is far behind. You try to move all the way back to safety, and it's just too late, right? You're too deep. And this is why we should be careful of those things, never underestimate them. The whole plan of the shaitan is to take you down in steps, right? And if he can't get you into Jahannam completely, he'll at least get you punished in Jahannam, right? And it goes further, like, you know, as much as he can. Wallahu a'lam. What time is it? What time did we start? 6:18. I think I'll stop here, inshallah. We'll pick up from verse 6, inshallah, next week. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Do you guys have any questions? We're good? طيب, I think there's food at the back. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم.